Welcome back to the Autoblog podcast. I'm Greg Migliore. This is episode 700. It's a big one. We should probably pop some champagne, have a cake. I don't actually remember what we did for 600, 500, 400, 100, any of them. But hey, it's a big one. It's a milestone. Thanks for listening. It's really been a great show that I think is one of the oldest podcasts in the automotive industry. So with that, I'll bring in Associate Editor Byron Hurd. Welcome to the party.
Hey. It's been a wild few weeks for just about everything, huh?
That it has. But we have a great show for you today. Episode 700 is, lots of cool cars. We're going to talk about the Acura TLX A-Spec that we have in our long-term fleet, even though it's not actually in our long-term fleet possession right now. But we have a Type S as the placeholder. So that's awesome. We have a lot to talk about. We've both driven those cars. We just actually swapped those cars. I personally drove it to you, Byron, as part of my duties. Did some fleet maintenance, sent it over about 2 weeks ago now. So lots to talk about there. Genesis G70, Polestar 2. And we'll spend your money. We have a good one. So let's jump right in. TLX Type S. Interesting cars. I've enjoyed driving them both. My take on the Type S is there's definitely more of a muscle car vibe. That V6 with the turbo obviously gives you plenty of power. I think it sounds kind of good. There's some subtle things like the exhaust pipes and some of the other treatments that it's just a cut above the A-Spec, which I think already really looks the part from a design perspective. I don't necessarily think you'd look at the Type S and immediately say, oh, that has a bit more horsepower, a little bit more grunt than the A-Spec does, which I think speaks more to the A-Spec than the Type S. It's kind of a commentary, I think, on how good the A-Spec looks. I'm going to kind of cut to the chase about my conclusion. I have long said the A-Spec is all you need. I like that four-cylinder. I like the tuning. I like basically everything about it. It's been one of my more, I'd say, engaging long-term cars I've experienced. That said, I think the step up to the Type S is worth it. That's been my opinion after driving the Type S for the better part of a week. I like that engine. I like the vibe it gets you. So I would say initially I was like, A-Spec, that's all you need. After I had driven the Type S, I was like, nope, this is the one you want. And now I've kind of moved back towards the middle to, I think it's more worth your money to step up if you're maybe that type of an enthusiast. You don't have to. I'd say I've moderated my position, but I do think it's a good value if you want to step up to it. So that's kind of my nutshell take. We could get into a little bit more, but that was my take. What do you think, Byron?
Yeah, I'm pretty much in lockstep with you on this one. Like I had the A-Spec for quite a while from our long-term fleet, and I really got used to driving that thing. I was surprised by how much I liked it. It drives like a very small car, and having the smaller turbo engine instead of the bigger V6. They're both turbocharged, but the four-cylinder turbo. It really takes a lot of weight out of the nose. It's just it feels like a much smaller car in a way that the Type S doesn't. Like the Type S feels like it's a mid-size luxury family sedan. Like it's got some heft to it. You feel it in the brakes, you feel it in the steering, you feel it, everywhere. It's heavy. It's a good bit over 4,000 pounds, I'm pretty sure. So, it's quite a bit even for 360 horsepower ish. I don't recall exactly what it is off the top of my head, but it's definitely a very different feel, and the power's great. That engine's as good as anything else in the turbo 6-cylinder segment until you get to like real performance cars, using that with quotes. But I really think that I'm leaning closer to A-Spec than Type S for my personal preference. And especially, I've practically been driving these things for 2 months straight, and having them back to back the way they have has been great because, usually you say up a one and then it's months before you get to try the other, if you even do. And having them back to back, you really feel the difference. And I think that the refinement level in the A-Spec is a little bit better. I think the comfort level in the A-Spec is a little bit better. Like it feels like an all-around more livable vehicle with fewer compromises. And, it'll be cheaper to buy, cheaper to own, cheaper to maintain, probably. So there are a lot of advantages to it, and I really think that the smaller you can get a car like that to feel, the more kind of balanced it comes across. Because with front wheel drive, once you get really big, you kind of feel like the whole chassis sort of being dragged around by those front wheels, and the more you put behind it, the less dynamic the experience feels. And I think A-Spec really nails the balance there. So I think even with the Type S still in my driveway, as much as I'm enjoying it, between the two of them, I'm going to go with the A-Spec.
I guess that's good that we have a divergence of opinion here. I actually, I would say this. If I were like literally going to spend my own money, I would do A-Spec. But if it was more of like a hypothetical, unlimited resources, the world is perfect sort of thing, I would definitely do. Like I said, I think the Type S is worth the money. I think it gives Acura a nice halo too. I think that's kind of it's a good like vibe for them. They want to like, I would say, remind everyone that they're a performance brand. I remember I interviewed Dave Merrick, who's one of their top designers, a while back, and we were talking about, I think a Baja version of the Ridgeline or something, and we were just, kind of basically, back and forth the interview, and he just brought up the question: we did the NSX. Why don't people think of us as a performance brand? That was like, I'm paraphrasing him. And, they have some, trophies on the shelf from, their motorsports history. So, we're not talking about like, this is not nothing here. Let's put it that way. There's some history here. And I do think the early to mid 2000s were maybe not kind to Acura, if you will. And I think cars like the Type S and the TLX do bring it back. So from that perspective, I think they're solid.
Yeah, I agree there. And honestly, like, you look at Acura, and they've never really had a problem with how they drive. Like, most of their perception issues have come from styling and brand positioning and things like that, where it's like, okay, they're not a tier 1 luxury automaker. Okay, that's fine. They're also not trying to be. So it's one of those things where, customer expectations versus reality can sometimes, there's occasionally an abyss in between them. And I think Acura suffered for that a lot, especially in that time frame you mentioned, like leading up to and just after the financial meltdown, where, like you had the Beak era with the front end styling that, honestly, I mean, that's a, face only a mother could love type situation. And, people still parrot the Beak even now. The styling is nothing like what it was in 2009, but people still use that phrase. It's a stink that's kind of hanging around the brand. And I honestly don't think there's been an Acura that I've driven that I was genuinely disappointed by. I mean, there are some that aren't for me, but they're still good for what they are. And, chassis dynamics just have never really been a weak point. Even when you go to the mainstream brand, when you go to Honda, like even an Accord has always been a pretty nice car to drive. A buddy had a 4-cylinder 90 Accord with 100,000 miles on or something like that back in college. That was a great little car to drive. It wasn't exciting, but it was competent, and you didn't hate it, which, there were some sedans available in the late 80s, early 90s that were pretty hateable. So it's one of those things where it kind of reminds us how Honda and Acura kind of made their mark initially, where it wasn't that their cars were particularly sporty or, anything like that. It's just that they happened to be far more competent than what the competition was already selling. You're basically going up against stagnation with, hey, let's try and make this worthwhile. And that DNA still exists even today. It's not like they're making cars that aren't pleasant to drive. It's just, not all of them are universally appealing. That's fun.
I actually liked that kind of like grill Beak thing back in 2009. I can actually remember taking one to, I forget which Acura it was, but obviously it had the nose, as they all did back then, in a snowstorm with a manual transmission to 12 Oaks Mall, which is a mall around here. And people were like, cool car, So I feel like it was very polarizing, very divisive. The funniest, I think, version I heard, or like comparison, was it was like a 1940s train, like a locomotive. That was one of the things that I think I actually even used that in some of my stories from that era. But hey, mid-century trains are kind of cool, actually.
Yeah, there you go. Kind of a streamliner look. I can kind of
Yeah,
buy that.
yeah. So that's our Type S versus TLX. I'm gonna move over to a couple other cars. Um, I just got out of the Polestar 2, which is I think a very interesting electric car. It's a little understated. You know, you're talking about 230 plus miles of range. Horsepower is 408. So, you know, it's pretty capable. It's a pretty good, I think, credible Model S, or excuse me, Model 3 fighter based on sort of the size. But, you know, they're sporty looking sedans. You could, you know, maybe you look at a Model S and decide this is the one you want instead. You know, it, starts about 60 grand, I want to say. And it's quick as hell. It really is just, you know, lay on the throttle, the throttle, I don't know, the accelerator, whatever you want to call it. And it was, you know, it's a lot of fun to drive. I think Polestar, I was a little skeptical when they were going to try and move it off into its own thing, but there's a lot of brand heritage there for enthusiasts in motorsports. I remember some of the Volvo Polestars, like the C30, which, you know, that was one of my favorites back, you know, speaking of like 5-10 years ago, that were a lot of fun to drive. So I actually think it works. It's, like I said, it's a Q ship. It's a sleeper car. I mean, I would pull up places and people wouldn't notice it because it's like, what is a Polestar? You know, you look at the badge, it looks a little bit different. It's got that almost like concept car vibe, but it's, you know, you're gonna notice it up close. From far away, it's just another blue sedan, which is what it was. So, you know, there's that. I was just talking to our green editor, John Snyder, this morning, and he was, I think, basically comparing it favorably to, say, a Model 3. I was like, you know what? I still feel like with a Tesla, you're driving a Tesla. You know, with a Polestar, you could be the guy who has stories to tell, but with the Tesla, you're still the guy with the Tesla. So, I mean, I think that's how I unscientifically break this down. And maybe you'd rather be the guy who's telling stories about your Polestar. I don't know, you know. But I mean, it's a lot of fun to drive. We were actually testing the Android Auto operating system for our Tech of the Year, which we're sort of doing in a hybrid model. We're doing it kind of on our own. We're going to vote on it. So more on that to come. If you remember Tech of the Year, you're a podcast listener, you're an Autoblog reader, it's happening this year. And that's what I actually had this loan for. Zach Palmer also is getting some time into it, which I think just ended. But Android Auto was pretty good in the Polestar. I was going back and doing a little bit of research. The Polestar CEO was saying, hey, we can't do infotainment as well as Google. We're just going to like partner with them and do it and go with that. And it's a really good application. Google Assistant worked well, like as good as my Android phone. Maps was great. You could control a number of the car's like functions through the touch screen, which is large and like easy to use, but not too large. It's more like that kind of iPad experience to blend Apple and Android here. And then in front of the driver, you get like another screen, but that's more like, I think it's like the need to know stuff is right in front of you. And then the stuff you don't need to know while you're driving, but might want to know is then to your right, which is natural IP, you know, relationships with, you know, the touchscreens. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of like a mini overview of the car. It's fun to drive. It's understated, but I think cool. And it's just another very interesting electric product out there if you're into that thing.
It's weird because for me, like Polestar's been kind of a blind spot. I just haven't happened to get to spend any time with one yet. And I wonder how much of it is like retention of Volvo DNA. Like, does it still feel like, apart from the electric stuff, that you're driving a Volvo? Like, does it have that aesthetic? Does it have that feel? Or is it very distinct? Like, where they're just like, the Polestar is Polestar and we're trying to avoid the Volvo connection. So, you know, this is what you get. Go with it.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I was in the same place. This is the first Polestar I've tested out. And, you know, I would say it was illuminating just to get the feel of like the infotainment, feel the like how good the you know, the electric powertrain is. So I came away favorably, you know, impressed with all of that. Is it separate from Volvo? I would say if you're like in the business and you knew that Polestar and Volvo are related, you would get in the car and be like, oh yeah, I can see it. But just sitting in it, like there's no like Volvo elements, I wouldn't say. There's nothing in there that you would identify and be like, yep, this is a Volvo. It's more just kind of like an informed feel you get. I don't necessarily think your average consumer would pick that up. They might, especially if they're a Volvo consumer. Like, you've owned like, whatever, an S60 or something over the years. But I mean, just aesthetically, not really. It's the similarities lie within the overall like ethos of, say, the interior design, in that it's simple. The materials are very like just really Spartan. Like that's one of the, I would almost say like there's a bit of dissonance there. Like you're going to pay 60 grand for a car and the inside kind of looks like, a mid-level Equinox or something like, and that's an exaggeration. It's nice in there, but it's so simple that you're almost like, okay, is this it? The inside doesn't feel like a $60,000 car. So I'd say that. So that's a long way of saying, I think, it's almost like if you see somebody and you're like, oh yeah, that's so-and-so's cousin, you might know that. But if you didn't, you wouldn't,
Right.
So it's, yeah, there's more like, there's some underlying genetics, if you will, but it's not like, oh, hey, here's the Orpheus crystal in the shift knob, So yeah, I don't know. It was a fun car to drive. I think you're going to be, when you get behind the wheel of one, you're going to really like dig into it. Because I think it's not so much that there's a lot going on, but it's very significant in what it represents. So
Cool.
yeah. So speaking of new brands, I drove the Genesis G70, which, man, that car is a lot of fun. It looks great. It was done up in like matte gray with black spoked wheels with the red calibers. I pulled up to a preschool pickup, and one of my nephew was like pointing at the wheels. He's like, what's going on there? The wheels are red. And I'm like, so this is actually the brakes, and it's so aesthetically, again, this thing, there's a lot to talk about. Genesis is really making its play. I think these look like almost like mini Bentleys, just some of the way they've almost tried to conjure that really premium feel. It's a rocket ship to drive, though, is for that segment. The steering is dialed in, chassis is great. I like the interior. The one I had was bright red. So, everything the Polestar did quietly, the G70 is like, hey, look at me right here, rock star. So, yeah, I think there's a lot to like in that sense. And I really think like, it's tricky because if you want to own a luxury car, you got to go with like a C-Class or an E-Class or BMW. Cadillac still has the brand awareness, if you will. But I mean, if you can sort of maybe say, I'm willing to try out this Genesis thing, you get a lot of car. I had the turbocharged 6 with 365 horsepower. Torque is, I want to say, 376. That's a lot of power for a relatively small sedan. Again, I think it looks great. Yeah, I mean, I guess to throw it to you, where do you think Genesis is at? I know you are attempting to be a CT4 Blackwing owner. And for you, I think I'll put words in your mouth, but I feel like for you, it's more like just the raw meat and potatoes, like thing that offers that it's sort of a dinosaur that's going away. I mean, I don't know, maybe you've always aspired to own a Cadillac, but that's what the mid-century dream. But I mean, what do you think of Genesis? Like I think this is a pretty compelling product. But would you want it, or would you say, now I got to keep going to something from Bavaria or Detroit?
Honestly, like it's funny, like after Polestar, this is another one that's kind of a blind spot for me. I've never really driven a G70. I've driven
Wow.
G80 and the Genesis before it and the Equus before it or above it, but the G70 for some reason is just another one of those that has managed to escape me. But I like them a lot. And when you mentioned the color combination, I pulled up the bit I wrote about the launch edition for 2022 because that's the combination that you had.
Yeah.
And I love it. The headlights, the double slit headlights, I'm not entirely sold on that. It's different. I don't know if it's good or bad. It's just, it takes some getting used to. But I mean, it's got like Maserati lines to it. It looks very Italian. I think it looks great. And the interior looks fantastic too. And honestly, like, I fell into the Cadillac thing mostly just because it happened to fit me. Like it's one of those cars where just I got in and it was one of those moments where it's just like everything works exactly the way my body thinks it should. And when you have that kind of match with a car, it's hard to like, to even consider other things. Either they might be objectively better, but when it just works for you, that's kind of game over, especially when it comes to something that I'm not going to rely on my Blackwing for commuting. That's not the point. It's a fun car, like, it's a performance car. It's something I'm going to drive because I want to drive. I'm not going to drive it because I have to. So in that situation, I want a car that is going to make me want to do that as often as possible. And that's exactly what that car offers. I have no problem with the G70 though. It looks fantastic. I know that chassis has been praised. I love the old Genesis Coupe, which is essentially what this is. And I mean, I actually thought that was a wonderful little car. I thought it was underrated by enthusiasts. It had some small, like, there were some issues with the transmission, didn't have the best feel, and some of the lockout scenarios it would put you in, especially like in high performance applications, if you were tracking it or something like that. Occasionally you'd have to fight with the manual gearbox even to get the gears you want. That was a bit of a problem. But apart from that, it was a great little car. It handled wonderfully, had good feel. I would have liked to see that continue, actually. I would have liked to see Hyundai push that as more of a, rather than Kia going off and doing the Stinger, it would have been more fun to see like a Hyundai muscle car. And, it's all right. We got a luxury one instead, but I mean, the bones in that thing are great. So I have no beef with it at all. And in fact, if someone came to me asking about it, I would 100% say, oh yeah, go for it. That I love it. And God, just that matte gray looks fantastic. The matte gray over red, that combo that you had, that's spot on.
It's, SEMA is coming up, and I actually had a streak of going to that basically every year from like 08 through like 15, 16, somewhere in there. It's one of those things where like, it's not everybody's favorite show to go to, but I always kind of liked it. It was accessible. You see some hot rods, you see different things. But I mean, this to me was like straight out of like, out of Vegas, out of SEMA, the matte paint, something you would have seen maybe like Reese Millen, pull the cover off and do is like the Reese Millen edition, which he did with some Hyundais for a while. Yeah, it's cool. I mean, it's a little bit, is this definitely the shade everybody's going to want? I don't know about that, but I do. Again, for me, I was like, yeah, this is cool. It almost a little bit looked like a wrap, to be perfectly honest. Like when I pulled up, I thought, whoa, what's in front of my house? It arrived while I was gone. And I'm like, okay, here we go. It's Genesis week. But, I would say this, what actually kind of got me in the frame of mind for the G70 is I drove the GV70 a few weeks before that. And I was really taken with the styling. And it had this, I believe, the same motor, and it had, also a pretty loaded up interior. I've been driving some fairly high-end Genesis vehicles, Genesi. So it's like, it's easy to get a good impression. That said, Genesis is a brand that will throw value like down your throat. Like if you like this car and maybe you don't want to do the launch edition, but you're like, hey, give me the 252 horsepower 2-liter turbo, which is a really nice motor. Get that in all-wheel drive or rear-wheel drive. You can get this car for like, just look at the Genesis site. We're talking about $37,525. That's the MSRP, not including other costs. That's a screaming deal. The average new car price was $45 in like as of like yesterday. Check out Autoblog.com. So, I mean, you're talking average vehicle is $45, and you can get this for $37. I mean, yeah. And I mean, that to me just speaks to how out of whack like the world is right now as far as inflation and prices, because what's getting baked into that 45 figures, all the crossovers, people paying full price and for like everything. And of course, we love SUVs and trucks. So that's driving it up. But you're paying full price for that Chevy Equinox or Hyundai Tucson or, whatever. There's not a ton of incentives out there right now, unless you want to go buy, I don't know, some car that is in high demand and expensive or something.
Right.
So, that's the flip side. If you can get a deal like this, you're getting a lot of car for that. So, and honestly, I will give Genesis credit all day long and Cadillac for saying, hey, we're going to make rear wheel drive sports stands for this year anyway.
Right.
Maybe electric's coming down the road, but hey, I got to give them some credit. This is a really good car. This would have, actually, I haven't even looked at what the buff books have done, but this car would win comparison tests against like Germans and American, Japanese lineups all day long. It might not finish first, but I don't think it'd finish last. If we did that test, run out of track for a day. To me, this has all of those like, assets, on offer, and they all come together quite well too. So
yeah, I buy that just on spec. Honestly, like, because I've driven a lot of the cars it competes with, especially, just in the past year, even I've been in a few of them, and just on paper, I would rather have it than a Lexus IS or probably a 3 Series. And it's a really great package, a really good value, and it just really doesn't feel like you're missing out on anything. Like, there's no catch. That's what really gets it. Like, like people early on, like, oh, they're Hyundais. Yeah, and like that doesn't mean much anymore.
Right.
So, it's nice that there's something coming out of them that we can actually get excited about. So
we gonna call a bit of an audible here before we spend some money and move on to other things, but we did put you guys probably heard that California is banning gasoline-powered lawn equipment coming up soon. And there's a list on Autoblog saying, hey, maybe you live in California, maybe you just want to go electric. I think most people actually have one or two electric power tools in the garage, whether you still use a gasoline-powered lawnmower or whatever you use. So you recommended, we actually both recommended similar things that use the same battery. So why don't you kind of, what did you throw out there? And check out the story, by the way. If you're in the market, we have, the holidays coming up. Maybe you want to try to get a good price now, end of season, before, like March, when all this stuff is going to be hard to find and expensive. But yeah, tell us about your entry.
Sure. Well, I'm living in a house that has it's just a little 50s brick ranch, very typical for suburban Detroit. And so I don't have a very large lawn, and it's also quite flat. You've been to my place. You've seen like the front yard's got about, maybe a foot of taper to it, and that's it. So like I didn't really need self-propel or anything like that, which is what really hammers battery life, I think, in a lot of those push mowers. So I just went with a very basic Ryobi 20-inch deck. It's been flawless for me. I could do the front and backyard with it, no problem. The as you mentioned, the real nice thing about these battery powered electric is that you get a battery, you can use it in any one of the tools that uses the same style battery, even if it's not the same capacity most of the time. So like I have that lawnmower. I also have the leaf blower that you liked. So I can, and the leaf blower, the version I have, it actually has 2 battery attachment points on it. So I can actually put my lawnmower battery and my leaf blower battery on it. And I've got all the life in the world I need to, clear all the old oak leaves out of my yard in the fall. So it's really nice. I can do the whole yard on just either one of the 2 batteries. I've got the second one as a backup if I do need it. And I've been really happy with it. They're quiet. I've got a neighbor who works nights. I can mow the lawn at lunch and not wake him up, because it's like pushing a box fan around the yard. It's great.
Yeah, I hope my Ryobi leaf blower balances out this probably 10-year-old. That may be optimistic. Briggs and Stratton Craftsman 650 World War I edition lawnmower that this is probably the lawnmower why California is like, dude, we got to ban these things if you're still going to use this thing.
It's the Enfield just like rifle of lawnmowers.
Yeah, it's just, and it's kind of like, I don't know. It's just like I don't know about you, but I don't think about my lawnmower. Like I have never bought a lawnmower. I just, whenever my parents were like, we're done with this one, I was like, I'll take this one. So I'm still using my dad's old lawnmower from like whenever he got it. And so this is definitely a legacy thing, but I also don't want to spend $500 on a lawnmower. Like why would I? So there's that. And I mean, just whenever you look, you drive around like on say Saturday morning, like people use all sorts of lawnmowers. It's actually kind of amusing between like the really expensive one and the expensive ride along one and then just the old one. But I mean, I would just say electric power tools are fun. I think it's, I'll fire up the old lawnmower, but then I'll be charging all my power tools. So I can use the leaf blower, use the trimmer, got to get around the fence. Like I have what do I have? I have a Black & Decker, just trimmer, which is good for fence posts and like getting in the cracks on the sidewalks, that sort of thing. So yeah, check it out. I think it's interesting. I'll say this. You said recommend. I would recommend it within reason. Sort of like if maybe you already have a Ryobi tool and you have the battery, sweet. You could get this for like $69, $70. If you want to do a ton of research, the Ego one I think is maybe a little bit better. I don't know. I haven't tried it, but it's a little bit more. And for me, it was basically like, okay, I need a leaf blower. For the amount of research I'm willing to do, for the fact that I already have a drill that uses the same thing and I could get this, I'm not going to lose sleep over this as long as it works for 20 minutes. So in that sense, it's a safe pick. If you get a deal on it, even better. If you want to do research for a week, you might find the Ego one or some of the other ones are better. But, again, for like $70, you really can't beat that. Yeah. So that is our electric power tool segment. Check it out. Let's go ahead and spend some money. This is from Eli. Hey guys, budget is $30,000. Reluctantly will stretch to $35,000. Okay. I'm looking for a vehicle that has a fun factor in some capacity. This could go in a number of different directions. Sporty, off-road, interesting. I could do new or used. Should be no more than 4 years old, preferably CPO. Would be a great bonus to still be under warranty. Leaders in the clubhouse, Jetta GLI, Golf GTI, BMW M240i, or the 2 Series or 3 Series in general. Now, for off-roading, he's looking at a Tacoma or a Maverick with the FX4 package. At the lower end of the budget, maybe I should consider a Kia Forte GT with their excellent warranty. He wants to own it for 6 years, so we're looking to be fairly reliable, and he wants it to maintain his interest for all 6 of those years. Mazda 3 is under consideration, but that may not seem sporty enough. Also is suggesting to look at maybe the Kia Stinger as well, which could be out of his budget. So 30 to 35 grand. Those are the options. I will, excuse me, before I toss it over to you, Byron, I'm not going to give my total answers, but I'll say this. Just mentioned the G70. You could get it for about 37. That's probably more than your stretch, but it's a good car, like I said, and you will be interested in it, I think. So I'll preface things with that. I would say this, if you're looking for something fun, the Maverick with the off-road probably isn't going to be the level of spiciness you're looking for. The Ranger's not cheap, but the Ranger with the FX4 is a little bit more of the vibe you're looking for, I think. So I would say look into that. So that's kind of like my half answer. Over to you, Byron.
Yeah, you really nailed it there with the Genesis thing. As we're like, you probably we're watching each other as we're doing this, so he probably saw my facial expression changing as he was going through the paragraph, and I was just like, "Oh, we just covered everything this guy was requesting." So yeah, that the G70 makes a ton of sense. I don't know. This is broad. There's so much you could do with this. I'm assuming transmission is not a consideration based on what he said, and I mean, that really opens up a ton for you, depending on how many compromises you're willing to make. I mean, you could get just about anything for 35 grand. I mean, maybe CPO is a stretch, and maybe the year range becomes a stretch, especially in the current climate. But I mean, you could get a you could get just about any one of the compact, uh, premium or luxury sports sedans CPO for 35, I would imagine. I mean, you're probably going to get one of the smaller four-cylinder engines, but it's not necessarily a deal breaker. And as we were just discussing earlier, I think the balance of the A-Spec actually makes it just as fun to drive, but in a different way as the Type S. So, the small engine doesn't have to be the bad engine, just small. So you get a lot of options there. I mean, if you need it to be family friendly, which doesn't really seem like is the case, I mean, you could certainly get a pre-owned Miata or something along those lines. It sounds like they want at least 4 seats, though, just looking at what's been suggested here. This one's pretty wide open. I don't know that I have any one answer. I don't really like the Stinger for this, strangely enough, even though I was just talking about Stinger in relation to G70. Because honestly, I think the Stinger works best when you go full bore with it. It's that car really wants the big V6, the trick rear differential, and all that kind of stuff. It's a big, brutish GT car. Putting the smaller, lighter engine in it doesn't really do a whole lot for it. If you're going to do that, I would recommend like maybe a certified pre-owned Mustang EcoBoost performance package or something along those lines. Rear-wheel drive, turbo, you can get an automatic or a manual, whichever you prefer. Plenty of power and some tuning headroom in it. You can have a lot of fun with something like that. So
I would give, just kind of loop back here, a couple more of my answers. I would say I'm looking on Carfax right now, Mustang GT 2017 for 31 grand. So, that's right in the sweet spot. I think that might be a car you might decide you get and then decide you don't want to let go of it in 6 years. We don't really have geographic location here. So that's, winters, the Mustang GT are less than fun. Although I've driven a Mustang GT in winter, manual transmission in January in Michigan, and I don't even remember if it was on snow tires. I wouldn't advise doing that as like your daily driver, but I mean, depending on where you live, it's doable if you're talking more like somewhere in the south or something. So that could be fun. I think maybe look at an ATS or a CTS. Again, those are cars with good chassis. Again, you're probably looking at the smaller motors, but those are brash, like American sports stands that are going to keep you interested. And again, those are better commuter cars, at least the CTS would be. So that would fit in that price range. Cadillacs tend to take a pretty good depreciation hit, so that means it can kind of come back down into your wheelhouse. On the list you've provided, I mean, the Taco's a ton of fun for sure, but they're expensive. I think right now you got to pay the Toyota tax, it seems like. So you might find some issues as far as finding one there. 4Runner, which is probably even more expensive, but if you're willing to take some miles, that's a fun one. I think that's a good off-road vibe. You might, enjoy driving, and you might decide, again, that's another vehicle that you don't want to give up in 6 years. So that's another good one. And then just looking at the list here, I drove the GTI earlier this year, and the new GTI, I would say, and I would say I was impressed with it. It's exactly what you would expect with the GTI. There's nothing in there that you're going to be like, whoa. Again, from a value perspective, you might even want to try and take a couple-year-old one just to like if you don't care about the new infotainment or any of that stuff, some of the stuff they've done to the reduce steering interventions, things like that, you're not going to really care about that. It's still the GTI, but it's also a fun car. So I'll say that. And I would be one of the people who would come down with GTI over Golf R. I just prefer the dynamics, but yeah, that's where I would land. I think we probably threw a few more choices at you rather than narrowed the field. But, again, I would say depending on your climate, Mustang GT could be fun. Used car, couple years old. That would be fun. Look at an older Cadillac. That might work. CTS, ATS. And again, if you're looking new, like a G70 could definitely get in there. So,
yeah, and actually, thinking about like the off-road options too. I was just trying to see if I could find prices on Colorado ZR2, because that's just a very nice. I mean, it got its reputation because it's the off-road Colorado, but those DSSV shocks actually make it incredibly nice to drive on the road. That's actually kind of what makes it so impressive, I think, is that it's one of the few off-road vehicles you can go out there and buy that doesn't punish you every day when you're driving it. Granted, that's going to be probably at the top end of your budget, especially considering the demand for trucks right now, the lack of supply of trucks right now, and the fact that it is so good. They're probably holding their values pretty well, so they might be too expensive for the budget. But I mean, when I look at like a ZR2 versus say like a Jeep Gladiator, like the Gladiator has a lot of appeal to me because it's a Jeep and I'm a Jeep owner and I like them. So that's great. It's also a little smaller in ways that matter if you're living in like tight urban parking situation and stuff like that. But the Colorado is going to be a far more livable vehicle for every day of the week. And I think that extends to Tacoma too. Like, especially if you're talking about a TRD or a TRD Pro Tacoma, those are harsh vehicles for a daily commute. And I don't know that you're going to enjoy driving those for 6 years. So if you are interested in off-road and you like the idea of a pickup truck, I would actually look at a Chevy before a Tacoma if long-term livability is your priority. If you're more concerned with reliability, if you're more concerned with resale value, the Toyota is a better choice.
I would, like I said, I mentioned the Ranger earlier on too with the FX4. You know, you could probably get a used one at this point because it's the same truck. A couple years back, Colorado overall is probably a little bit better at this point. So that's a good choice too. And they're both fun to drive, I think. They're fun to commute in. You know, the Ridgeline is like, you know, a Pilot, if you will. Whereas, you know, you get in a Tacoma or a Ranger or a Colorado, you have some fun, I think, you know, just from the steering feel and the suspension like treatments you can get. So yeah, Eli, let us know how it goes. So cool. Send us your Spend My Monies, podcast at autoblog.com. If you enjoy the podcast, please give us a great review, 5 stars if you like, on Apple Podcasts. We're available on Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify. 700 episodes, that's a big deal. I want to give a shout out to Eric Meyer, who produces the show, edits it, cleans up all of our flubs and things like that. And also he puts together the Autoblog theme, which starts and ends the show. You may or may not know that. His group is called Skyway Traffic. Give them a listen. Be safe out there, and we will see you next week for episode 701.